Hello, everyone. My name is Garvin, and I read things and ramble about them on the internet for your entertainment. So today is the day that so many viewers and patrons have told me they're waiting for. We're going to talk about Disney's Atlantis, The Lost Empire. Now, at this point, I just want to mention I've made a number of repairs and updates to the computer, and in theory, this should have fixed my audio issues. I do want to say thanks to everyone to their patience. Please let me know if you see an improvement in the comments. But that said, let's get back to why I'm here, why you're here. Let's talk about Atlantis, the Lost Empire. By the way, fair warning, I'm not going out of my way to convince you to see a movie that's been out for 22 years, one that you can easily see on Disney Plus if you have it. So I am going to be spoiling the hell out of this plot. The movie is set in 1914. World War I is raging in Europe and will, before the decade is out, devour an entire generation of young men, tear down empires that have lasted for centuries, and ignite civil wars and revolutions that will have grave implications for future generations up to and including our own. Milo Thatch, our hero, trained linguist and cartographer, is stuck in the boiler room of the Smithsonian Museum. He's also a professional laughingstock because of his repeated attempts to get fundings for expeditions to find evidence of Atlantis. This has become so bad that his bosses do an underhanded trick of changing the time of the meeting and not telling him until 30 minutes after the new meeting time, which I think we can all agree, that's just dirty, man. That's just mean. Now, Milo, to his credit, does not take this lying down. He charges out of that boiler room, confronts his boss, tries his level best to get his boss to at least look at his evidence and research, and when that fails, tells his boss, hey, if you're not funding my expedition, I'm leaving. I'll give you my 2 weeks right here, right now. Unfortunately, his boss just kind of laughs that off and tells him, hey, if you want to wreck your career, that's on you. Although I'm telling you not to do it, we're going to need you in that boiler room come the winter. Which, that had to hurt. That had to hurt. Well, Milo has to trudge home under the weight of this fresh humiliation, and he finds a sinister but lovely blonde woman who wants to introduce him to her boss. He, of course, agrees to this because he doesn't have a choice. Now, Milo is voiced by Michael J. Fox, who does a really good job acting Milo, in my opinion. And there is a rumor that Milo's design was based on the movie's linguist, Mark Okrand, who created an actual Atlantean language for the movie using Indo-European root words and grammar inspired by Native American and the Sumerian languages. Now, this is an interesting combination because Native American languages are not related to the Indo-European language tree, and neither is Sumerian. In fact, fun fact for you, we're not entirely sure where the Sumerian language comes from because it doesn't fit into the Indo-European family tree or the other major tree of the area, the Semitic languages, which include languages like Akkadian and Babylonian. So it's a bit of a mystery. But back to the movie. The boss in question that Milo has been brought to meet is the yoga-practicing and somewhat erratic Mr. Whitmore, a wealthy man who is friends with Milo's grandfather, Thaddeus Thatch. And I would just like to take a minute to say that is the most 19th century name I've heard in a while. Milo's grandfather, Thaddeus, was an explorer and archaeologist, as well as a father figure to Milo, who took over raising him for most of his life when Milo's parents died when he was very young. So a lot of Milo's drive is to complete his grandfather, his father figure's dream, just to add some extra sympathy points on top of all of this, I guess. Now, Mr. Whitmore had made a bet saying he would fund the expedition to Atlantis if the journal was ever found, and In his own statement, he's a man of his word. I will say this for him, he is most certainly a man of his word, because the expedition he funds is hundreds of men strong, using submarine technology that honestly wouldn't be out of place in the 1950s. This expedition is somewhere between 200 and 400 men strong in the beginning, and that makes the submarine in question incredibly vast. Now, for reference, the biggest nuclear submarine, the Typhon class, had a crew of about 160 men, and they were kind of crammed in there. So the fact that they can fit so many people, as well as trucks, specialized mining equipment, supplies, super impressive submarine. I'm really sad that it was only on screen for a short amount of time, all things considered. This is also where we meet the many other characters in this movie, and this colorful and diverse cast is a strength and a weakness, I feel. First, there are a lot of really interesting characters. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm just going to give some examples. We have Dr. Sweets, who is half Arapaho, half African American, and a medical doctor from the United States in 1914. The fact that a man who would be considered African American or mixed race is a medical doctor at this time tells me he is a man of will, determination, and staggering intelligence and awe-inspiring patience because, look, I love my country, but I'm not going to pretend there isn't a huge legacy of racism that crushed the lives of millions of men and women and still affects real people today. For someone like Dr. Sweets at the beginning of the 20th century to earn a medical degree would have taken a lot of drive and intelligence given his background, and that alone tells us a lot. The fact that he's also an incredibly patient, nice, and caring person, amazing. But let's move on. We also have Audrey Ramirez, the engineer and mechanic of the expedition, who was recommended to the position by her father after being personally trained by him. The fact that she's even on this expedition tells us a lot about her. We also have Vinny, who grew up in a flower shop, but after nearly being killed in an explosion, decides to devote his life to demolitions. Now, personally, having served as a combat engineer in the Marine Corps, I want to say I understand. In fact, I'm a little disturbed how much I understand Vinny, and I don't think I'm going to examine that understanding too much or too deeply. We're just going to move on. We also have the dirt-obsessed Moltaire, who I'm just going to refer to as Mole because, dear God, that's what he is. These are all great characters that I want to know more about and easily could have served as a cast for their own movie or even their own miniseries because there isn't enough time in this movie to do all these characters justice while focusing on Milo's arc in the main plot. I kind of wish the crew had got their own kind of prequel series or even just a movie of them running around the world doing dubious explorations for money or something. That would have been great. I would have watched the hell out of that. Speaking of great characters, I want to talk about our antagonists, Rourke and Helga. Now, I find Captain Rourke incredibly fascinating on a certain level as a villain because he also displays a lot of positive traits. He's actually fairly patient with Milo and at points even encouraging. He treats his men and women well and respects them as experts in their field. He's a very effective leader. We don't ever see him browbeating or threatening people until his heel turn. He comes across as this very firm but fair leader right into his turn into villainy. But at the same time, that villainy feels organic to his character. When it happens, you're not going, this came out of nowhere. You're like, I was really hoping it wouldn't come to this, but I can see it. Yeah. This is incredibly well done, And I think the movie deserves more credit for this, honestly. Also deserving credit is James Gardner, the voice actor, who was a great choice because he sold this character 100%. That said, I also believed in him deciding to go complete villain for the biggest payday in history, but we'll get to that. Now, Helga, on the flip side, comes across as more of a completely loyal and effective lieutenant than someone who's making her own agenda, and their relationship comes across as entirely professional and based on at least some mutual respect. So, at the end, when Rourke turns on her, and she, in a fit of outrage, tries to kill him back, all of this feels completely earned. I even feel slightly bad for Helga because she put her faith and loyalty in the wrong person. I don't feel that bad, though, because she still decided that genocide was an okay thing to do if she made enough money. Stick a pin in that, by the way. We're coming back to that. The movie does a good job building tension and keeping the stakes up while giving you moments to laugh and get to know the characters and form an attachment to them. For example, the attack on the submarine by the Atlantean war machine, really well done sequence. I enjoyed it. And the whole trip to Atlantis is a great watch. They encounter obstacles and dangers that whittle away at their numbers and resources the whole time, while allowing different characters to display their strengths and weaknesses. Atlantis itself is this amazingly picturesque ruin in this movie, and it's also here that the plot starts to fray and you start to notice some holes in the plot. In fact, the biggest one is probably the one that's been talked to death the most, but I feel like I gotta confront it. So, here's the issue. The Atlanteans live in the ruins of their capital city, the only remnant of their great continent-spanning empire that was destroyed by their own hubris and misuse of technology. Technology that is still littering the streets. The streets are full of 8,000-year-old machines just sitting there. And just as a thought, this tragedy could have been avoided if these people had OSHA, much like Aquaman's Atlantis. In fact, given that this was a careless weapons test, I'm going to say that a single competent range officer could have prevented this. So, at this rate, I'm starting to think our safety industry and our safety officers are all that stand between us and the apocalypse, and knowing some of these people the way I do, that's not going to help me sleep well tonight. Back to my point. Now, this technology is insane. I mean, Star Wars has ridiculously rugged tech, but this is a whole new level because these machines will work perfectly as long as you plug a crystal the right size into them and activate them in the right way, and the right way is written on every machine. It's as if the instruction manual on how to start and drive the car was written on the car. So I can hear some of you saying, okay, yeah, they lost their written language and stopped using perfectly good machines because they forgot how to use them, but it's been 8,000 years. It's totally believable to lose things. And you're right, but there's one detail that spikes this. Kida, the Atlantean princess, who is a secondary protagonist in this movie, was alive when Atlantis sunk. She looks Milo's age. Now, she was only a toddler when the disaster happened, 8,000 years ago, but there were plenty of adults and older children among the survivors, including her own father, and none of these people bothered to teach her how to read one word. Nobody pulled their kid aside and taught them how to read the machine instructions just in case. That's a problem. Now, the Disney Wiki, because I went digging here, says that the king, Kida's father, did his level best to erase the knowledge of their history and technology after, the self-inflicted cataclysm. And I can see the traumatized people of this city who just witnessed millions of people die, including family members and friends, going along with this because, when you've gone through this trauma, you're willing to do some crazy things. But none of that is said or shown in the movie, so we're left asking, there's no one left who can read even basic instructions written on the machines? And we have at least 2 people who've lived for thousands of years. Now, it's possible that only the royal family lives that long. It's never really touched on in the movie. And if it's only the royal family with that level of longevity, that helps. But even then, it seems really convenient that Milo is somehow the only dude who can read Atlantean and has to teach the Atlanteans how to read their own language. It feels kind of weak and contrived. On top of that, Milo and Kita's relationship is kind of rushed. I mean, in the movie, they only get to know each other for like a day. But rushed relationships are kind of a Disney movie special, so I'm not going to harp on that too much. Let me step back a minute here and talk about this technology I've been ranting and raving about the whole video, right? All these machines require a crystal as part of the startup procedure. You have to get a small crystal, plug it into the right place, do the right startup procedure, and then the machine works. Now, conveniently, every Atlantean is walking around with a small crystal around their neck that can be used for this if only they knew how, right? I love the fact that every Atlantean after 8,000 years is still wearing these crystals, but I'm not going to harp on that because they are pretty and they are glow in the dark, and that is kind of useful in their situation. That situation being that Atlantis is in an artificial air pocket underground under the ocean. And it's surrounded by this huge labyrinth of caves and tunnels where if you go out, you might need a light source. Now, there doesn't seem to be a way to the surface. Every tunnel seems to lead to the ocean. So, when Helga and Rourke go looking for the main crystal, which is this huge crystal hidden under the city, and they find it and they decide to steal it, this is a problem. First, because they're stealing. Second, because the only way to actually steal the crystal is to mystically bond it with Kita. So we're not just stealing, we're kidnapping someone in the process. And just to add an extra layer of horridness on top, that crystal is actually powering the ecology of the air pocket. It's providing fresh water. It's probably helping switch carbon dioxide into oxygen and maintaining that cycle. So when you steal this crystal, you are condemning everyone in the city to die thirsty, hungry, and gasping for air in the dark. This isn't just theft and kidnapping, it's genocide. And that is just, you have decided to wipe out an entire culture for money. Now, I'm not going to say this is unrealistic because it's been done repeatedly in our history, but it's still like, wow, guys, super evil, not cool. Now, thankfully, the insanely durable technology of Atlantis, which is not dependent on the giant crystal, allows Milo to rally everyone into a rescue attempt, which ends in this giant aerial dogfight underground, which is great. So this Atlantis has airships. Yeah. The surviving crew that sided with Milo is sent home with enough treasure to not just be rich, but insanely rich. Milo chooses to stay and gets romantically involved with Kita and starts teaching the Atlanteans to read their own damn language. Happy ending all around for everyone who isn't Rourke and Helga, honestly. So, the art and the characters in this movie are great, and the adventure is fun, But once we get to Atlantis itself, things get rushed and the plot holes start to mount up and require you to do your own theorizing, and that detracts from the enjoyment for me. The plot is the weakest part of the movie, and unfortunately, much like Aquaman, we do not get to spend enough time in Atlantis itself. I'm starting to wonder if filmmakers are afraid to spend too long in Atlantis. Guys, this is a rich setting you've dropped in my lap. Let's explore it for a little bit. Let's, look around. That said, I did enjoy this movie despite its flaws, and I would encourage you to watch it for yourself. But let's talk about this version of Atlantis. One thing I want to touch on here is, I didn't mention this in my Aquaman videos, and I should have. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle should be considered an influence, I think, on the Aquaman setting of Atlantis, since he's the first person I could find to write of Atlanteans surviving the fall and living on the sea floor. This isn't quite the same, since these Atlanteans are living under the sea floor in their little artificially created air pocket, but it is close enough, so I am giving him the assist, even if this air pocket in the center of a vast labyrinth of tunnels and caverns also invokes the Coming Race novel just a touch for me. I did do a video on the Coming Race novel, guys, so if you want to check that out to see what I'm talking about, please feel free. Plato has less influence, just barely any, honestly, and mostly in the fact that Atlantis' history has that morality play element of their own hubris leading to their destruction, but there's not anything else. Donnelly is a bigger influence, and an example I'm going to give here is the Atlanteans speaking a root language related to most, if not all, human languages in the movie, thus allowing Kita to learn English almost instantly, which, I'm not going to lie, as someone who's been trained in anthropology, I twitched at that, but I'm going to let it pass because it lets our characters communicate, and Disney is not going to stress its audience with this kind of stuff. I would, but there's a reason I'm not making movies, right? This Atlantis, however, owes a lot, like a massive amount, to Edgar Cayce. Right down to being powered by a giant crystal and having ray guns. I'm going to be honest here, guys. This Atlantis feels like someone took Edgar Cayce's writing, turned to a group of Disney writers and go, okay, how do we make a cartoon out of this shit? If he was alive, I would be saying Disney owes him royalties on this movie. There's the giant crystal, the high technology, the misuse of that technology killing Atlantean civilization. I would honestly say, guys, you owe him money. Edgar Cayce is no longer with us, so whether or not his heirs could claim anything, or if enough time has passed that this would be public domain, I'm going to leave to the lawyers. I'm just going to tell you, this is Edgar Cayce's Atlantis, guys. Like Aquaman, this is a very American Atlantis, although I think Aquaman's Atlantis does a better job of tapping into the anxieties and worries of the American subconscious. We look at the story of Atlantis, and as a society, we are very aware that civilizations can die. And we know how close we've come in the past to destruction, and how likely we are to come close to destruction in the future. So when we look at Atlantis, we can't help but wonder if we're looking at a preview of our own fate. At the same time, I think we really like writing these Atlantis survives stories because it gives us hope that if Atlantis is the fate of our civilization, and I don't just mean the United States, guys, I mean all of human civilization on the globe, well, if Atlantis is the fate of our civilization, these stories give us the hope that not only can we survive, but we can rebuild into something better and stronger afterwards. That's what I've taken away from this summer-long look at Atlantis. it's part of our own obsession with civilizations falling and asking what the world would be like if our civilization fell. Only we get to put it into a fantasy setting, and that makes it less immediate than, say, Mad Max, and thus lets us be a little more hopeful in it. Now, I don't know if continental Europeans or others outside the English-speaking world would feel the same way or share this view of Atlantis, so I'm just going to throw out this invitation. If you are from outside the English-speaking world, I want you to feel free to share some Atlantean fiction from your home, or even just your personal view of Atlantis in the comments. If you are, from Asia or from Europe or South America or Africa, please feel free to chime in. What is a major Atlantean work of fiction in your neck of the woods, or even what's your personal take on the Atlantis story? Thank you for your participation. I appreciate it. With that invitation, I think this is a good place to end the video. I encourage all of you, though, to comment, like, and subscribe, and that really helps me in my eternal battle against the dread Lord Algorithm. Dare be on his name. I also want to thank my patrons. There is a link to the patron in the description below where you can join us for as little as $1 a month. You get bonus content and a vote in polls to determine future content. Speaking of patrons, special thanks to my biggest supporter, Big Steve. I could not have gotten this far without you, man, and I just want to say that. Next week, we're going to kind of do an epilogue by a creature feature where I look at mythical traditions that inspired a creature that showed up in the Lost Continent novel. Now, a number of the mythological creatures I've mentioned over the summer are honestly more attached to other lost lands like Hyperborea, so you're going to have to wait a bit for me to cover griffins and so on. Now, I will return to Atlantis someday, as there are other stories I haven't talked about, and I would also like to do other lost lands like Lemuria and Hyperborea. I feel like there's more room for me to look into those places. And my patrons will be a big force in determining when that happens. So feel free to join as long as you can. Next week, we're going to look at the dwarves of North America, and I hope to see you there. But until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.